my name is Taylor Rose, and welcome to my channel, Taylor Rose Reads, where we talk all about books and reading. Today's Webtoon review is over season 1 of Lady Devil. Let's get all the fun stuff out of the way. This comic does cover some distressing topics. Insert content warning here. This video will be a complete summary of season 1 of the comic, so the first 60 chapters. I will be going over literally everything in it, so if you are sensitive to spoilers, this is not the review for you. There is a lot of psychological stuff going on. It is kind of the downward descent into madness of multiple characters and going into the reasons why. The story is a fantasy, so there are magical elements. If you were offended by Game of Thrones, I think you would definitely be offended by this comic. Is as follows. Devil, I don't want to marry him. In hopes to escape a forced marriage, Giovinetta makes a wish to the devil to save her, but what she doesn't know are the consequences of her actions. Essentially, what we're getting into is that her twin brother John is transformed into a devil. This becomes clear within the first few chapters of the comic, so I don't really think that's a big spoiler. For ease of understanding, I am going to be calling Giovinetta Annette because that is John. Some things to note. The framing of this comic is that Annette is writing a letter about her experiences over the past few years. There will be different iterations of Annette that I will describe accordingly whenever they do something. So if I say 23-year-old Annette, I'm referring to the Annette who's writing the letter. If I just say Annette by itself, that is Annette as she is experiencing the story. So Annette in the past. There will also be Annette. The story begins with 23-year-old Giovinetta, Annette Valdemar, reflecting on her life. She is writing a letter to someone she refers to as Kretschmann, discussing basically the events of her life as they've happened over the last 3 years. So Annette is talking about her 20th year when she learns that she has been engaged to marry an elderly man from a neighboring duchy. So the Valdemars have been at war for quite some time, and this marriage would be advantageous to the war effort via an infusion of funds from her future husband. It is also a way for her family to get rid of her because she has been called Lady Devil ever since she was 12 years old, and she was widowed on the night of her first marriage. That same day, her twin brother Johannes returns to their home, Gustav Castle, from war. He gives her a chess set as she is locked in her tower bedroom, and it reminds her of their very close childhood. Annette reveals that she's been locked in this tower since she was 6 years old because the Duchess, their mother, caught Annette and John kissing. She has spent the 14 years since watching John from the window, seeing him grow stronger, more popular, more powerful, having fun and experiencing life from way up high in her tower. And it has filled her with this intense envy because she has been stuck with her super controlling mother this entire time. Like, she has essentially never been alone for over a decade. Interrupting her kind of like reverie, Annette is called to see the Duke, her father. And when she tries to protest this new marriage, he wordlessly threatens her. And Annette realizes that nobody's going to save her. She has one way out of this. So in desperation, that night, Annette sneaks down to the tower's basement to visit the Devil of Ducommon. The Duchess's family, the Ducommons, have been the caretakers of a set of 9 coffins containing the dismembered body parts of a devil. As all male members of the family have been killed in various ways, the Duchess is the last heir, and she has inherited the devil, whom she calls Kretschmann, and brought the coffins to Gustav. The Duchess told Annette that if you break open one of the coffins, you can make a wish on the devil's body part and it will be granted. So Annette has come down into the basement. She breaks open the final coffin. So 8 have already been broken. And she makes a wish. I do not want to marry that man. 23-year-old Annette, in her letter, states that she regrets ever making that wish because it was the wrong one to make. So upstairs in his room, John is racked with pain and wings rip out from his body. Annette can hear him screaming from the basement and believes that they must be under attack or something. She flees back to her room with her maid Griselda, and they run into a group of soldiers who are breaking into John's room, and they catch a glimpse of John being forcibly held down by this group of men. She is really shaken by this image and demands to know what's wrong with him. But Griselda tells her that he is just having a seizure brought on by his traumatic experiences in the war. You know, he went to war very early in his life. Annette doesn't really believe this explanation, as she once saw a boy outside having a seizure and kind of likened it to him being a broken puppet. Unlike John, who is actively screaming and fighting back against the men, and his room has been completely destroyed. Annette spends the night listening to John's screaming from the top of the tower and tries to reconcile this new information she has about John with her conception of him as this bright, happy, carefree person. When the screaming finally stops, Annette is able to sneak out of her room and she goes to visit John. So again, 23-year-old Annette is chiming in, stating that she never should have done this. Annette panics when she hears a guard coming up the stairs, knowing she would be punished if caught alone outside her chambers, because the only time she's been really allowed to leave, she's been escorted somewhere by Griselda. Right as she begins to run, John's hand whips out from his doorway and pulls her inside. He looks terrible. He looks like he's been through the ringer. Because it's been so many years since they last hugged or had really any direct interaction, Annette is really excited to see her brother, but he's pissed. He starts chewing her out, like, why in the world are you out at night alone without Griselda, and you came in a man's room? Like, what's wrong with you? And Annette, kind of points out, she's like, you're the one who dragged me in here. This makes John even angrier, and Annette is like kind of horrified to see him be so cold and furious. Like, he's full of this icy rage. So this is like a really common thread through the story, connecting John to their father, who is just like constantly like that. As Annette tries to apologize to John, he is taken by another seizure and starts screaming at her to run away. She watches in horror as he literally transforms into a devil. Annette tries to flee, but it is too late. The devil traps her in the room. At this moment, Annette remembers that the Duchess had warned her about this. The Kretschmann will grant your wishes if you wish upon a coffin, but the consequences will be dire and perverse. So essentially, the devil of Decoment is like a monkey's paw. And all Annette can think is that I should have wished for anything else, because the Kretschmann's granting my wish by killing me. Like, I don't have to marry that guy if I'm dead. She doesn't scream because she knows that she will be blamed for this. A, she's an unmarried woman in a man's bedroom. B, she turned her brother, the shining son of Valdemar, into a devil. She tries talking the devil down as he grabs onto her when he suddenly falls down in another seizure, and she books it out of there. She makes it back to her room and kind of notes how ironic it is that she feels safety now in the same place she's spent her whole life trying to escape. And then she thinks about, like, if the devil really is John, he must be in there somewhere. Like, he can't have been completely replaced. Obviously, being taken by surprise at this transformation, like, he must be scared or hurt. So against all reason, she decides to go back and see if she can somehow fix him. So she goes back to his room. So as she's watching the devil recover, she thinks that it's kind of like, it's actually really innocent in how it's behaving. And so she asks the devil, like, well, will you run away with me? Because if I stay, I have to marry the old man and you will be executed. She tries helping the devil up, but she's much smaller than him, so he falls on top of her and refuses to move. 23-year-old Annette, in her letter, wishes that she could tell her 20-year-old self that she was ignorant and she has always just been a body to trade. And because she has no inherent power or skill, she was depending on evil to save her. So Annette, trapped by the devil, begins to cry and the devil kisses her. We then go into a flashback of their childhood, where Annette, watching John grow up from the tower, grew to hate him. She was locked up alone, even though he was equally as guilty as her. Arguably, it was a consensual kiss. So she funneled all of her energy into envying him to the point of rage. He represented everything she wanted and could not be. So because of this, when the devil who looks like John kisses her, she is mostly just stunned and feels like she has suddenly become master over this devil, as well as over John, who has always been wild and free and uncontrollable in her perspective. To Annette's dismay, the devil begins groping her. When she protests, he repeats back to her in her own voice the words that she said as she broke open the final coffin. And so this confirms to her that all of this is a result of her wish to the Crutchman. She's still a little in denial, like this can't be the answer. But as she's looking into the devil's eyes, seeing John looking back at her with this intense longing, she is overcome by the realization that she has always just wanted John to feel the same way about her, as she always felt from him, watching him from the tower, so kind of obsessed. Again, against all good reason, she chooses to kiss the devil back. But she immediately kind of regrets this and tries to stop this interaction, but the devil continues escalating and everything fades to black. Annette wakes up the next morning, safely in her bed, fully dressed with, intact clothing. She immediately thinks that she just had some sort of wild fever dream the night before. But to confirm whether or not that's true, she races downstairs to John's room and she runs into him completely human. So she's relieved and almost hugs him, but instead just asks him if he's okay when they are interrupted by their younger brother, Winfried, who is a monk. Winfried congratulates Annette on her betrothal, and everything comes rushing back to Annette. So, all her memories of the night before. She is so distraught from, the threat of her oncoming marriage, breaking open the coffin, the devil who looks like Jean assaulting her, all of her, mixed feelings about her brother in the first place, and the weight of her religious guilt. She just faints in the hallway. Since they are right outside of his room, John carries her to his bed and asks if they could be alone for a minute. Griselda, the maid, immediately objects to this because how indecent, right? But Winfried acquiesces and drags Griselda out into the hall. On one hand, Winfried is like, our dad has more mistresses than he can count, but there's never once been a rumor of John having a lover. So my older brother's a rock. There's no way anything weird would be going on because they're also twins. And then on the other hand, he just wants Griselda alone because it is revealed that they are having an affair. I'm going to note that I really disliked Winfried's storyline before we get into all the weird stuff that happens. Shortly after this, Annette wakes up in John's bed and she immediately asks him if he remembers last night. He makes this terrible facial expression and she concludes that, oh, he remembers everything. And she's dismayed by this when he accuses her of being callous and he tells her that he was humiliated last night, which fires Annette up because how in the world was that humiliating for him? Does he even know how she feels? And he's like, well, it wasn't a first for me, so I kind of don't care how you felt. I'm sorry you feel humiliated that I revealed such a wretched side of myself. And Annette just starts cursing him out, accusing him of being conceited and that his nickname, the Shining Son of Valdemar, has gone to his head, even though she repeatedly told him to stop. At this, John is like, what are you talking about? You just stood there and watched the knights hold me down. And Annette realizes that, oh, John and I are talking about two different events. So he does not ostensibly remember becoming the devil. He only remembers having the seizures. She gets up to leave because she can't deal with this really, but John stops her, trying to explain that he cannot help his seizures and he doesn't really know why she's so upset about them. Annette apologizes, kind of, and says that she was out of line. He's the heir to Valdemar and she's a nobody, really. Distraught, Annette runs and hides in the garden where she just berates herself as she hides under a bush, admitting that after last night, she was actually kind of relieved to have evidence that John wasn't perfect like everyone thought, and that he was just as messed up and evil as she was. But in reality, if he doesn't remember, he is still unblemished and perfect, really, though now she knows there is a devil hiding inside of him. Back in Winfried's rooms, Winfried and Griselda have hooked up. She asks him why he has returned to Gustav, because he only ever gets sent back from the monastery when he's been in trouble. And Winfried reveals that this time he came back on purpose because he found some interesting information about the Devil of Ducommon and wants to research it. The next chapter starts off with a flashback from Winfried's perspective. He was an extremely sickly child, so he was forced to spend all his time with Griselda, mostly indoors. Otherwise, he would become very ill. And because of this, he was so jealous of John and Annette, who got to go outside and be normal children. He doesn't understand why John puts up with Annette, who he sees as selfish and stupid. And because of that, he's really put out by the idea that John prefers Annette to him. After they become teenagers, Winfried announces that he's going to become a monk because due to his illnesses, he could never be a knight like John. Winfried makes a joke about how going to the monastery will make his hedonistic habits or hobbies more exciting. He smokes, he drinks, he womanizes, because that means like he's not just doing what other people do, he's now like crossing a line because monks aren't supposed to do that sort of stuff. And while he's making this joke, Winfried notices that like John's really embarrassed by this. And so Winfried's confused. John, is clearly very handsome, and he's, on top of that, he's powerful. Like women are probably throwing themselves at his feet. But from John's reaction, he kind of extrapolates that John doesn't have anything to do with women, really. In the present day, Winfried sees John looking fondly over a dagger in his room, and he concludes that John must have a sweetheart who gifted him this knife. And so while John is gone, Winfried sneaks into his room and steals the dagger because he kind of, in his sick way, wants to see John suffer. That night, the screaming begins again. Winfried goes down to the basement, both to get away from the noise, which he assumes is from a tortured prisoner, and also to continue his research on the Devil of Ducommon by visiting the coffins. There, he finds Annette, and he tells her to leave so he can begin his research, and pulls out the stolen knife to begin taking apart one of the coffins. And Annette reveals that that's my knife. Where did you get it? And Winfried is immediately like, there's no way, you have to be joking. Like, you have to be kidding. Internally, he's like, I can't believe this is the woman that John was pining over. He initially refuses to give the dagger back, assuming that Annette is lying. And Annette smacks it out of his hand, pulls it from its sheath, and reveals a rose vine design going down the flat of the blade, and tells him that it was a gift from their mother. Winfried concedes that it must be hers and goes back to his research before asking Annette if all the coffins are broken because of her. She starts having a panic attack and tries to tell him that she had nothing to do with at least the first 8 coffins. And at this point in her panic attack, Annette reveals to the reader that earlier she went through her wardrobe and found that a set of clothes was missing, which indicates that the night with the devil wasn't a dream, even if John didn't actually remember any of it. As Winfried continues digging through the coffin remains, he finds a giant wing, and Annette, since this is the body part that Annette wished on, she assumes this means that the devil has left John and returned to the coffin. Winfried begins telling Annette what he has learned about the history of the Devil of Ducommon. It was apparently given as tribute to the Ducommon house, which was foolish enough to accept, and he theorizes that it was given specifically to curse their family. He originally thought that the legends were just stories, but seeing the wing for himself makes him think that at least one of these stories must be true. All of their family members have met early deaths, leaving only the 3 siblings to carry on the family line. But since they are a monk, a woman about to marry a decrepit old man, and a man with no seeming interest in women, the curse must be successfully working towards its goal of destroying the family. Annette is so upset by this revelation that she throws up, and in disgust, Winfried goes to find Griselda for her. As he is walking around searching for Griselda, he asks a guard how long the torturing is going to go on, and the guard explains that, it's actually John screaming from his seizures. And Winfried is kind of perversely elated, knowing that his theft of the knife must have affected John like he predicted. Just like Annette, he is thrilled to see John brought down to his level from the pedestal that he has always been set upon. After Annette has been taken back to her rooms and fallen asleep with a fever, something makes its way through her window. She dimly realizes through her sleepiness that the devil has returned. It pulls her from the bed into its arms, and she tries to ignore what's happening as it feels up her body, hoping that she's just having a nightmare. But then the devil that looks like John speaks to her in John's voice, telling her to look at him. In that moment, she knows the devil is truly John. It's not just some sort of weird coincidence, like it is part of him. He asks her if she had known about his feelings all along, if she was just tricking him or taking pity on him. He insists that she hates him, which she denies, but he refutes that, saying that she has always just pretended not to notice as she rejects him. This confuses her because it doesn't really match up with her memories of their relationship. Other than telling him to stop during his first assault, she has never rejected him to her memory. He continues asking her question after question, growing angry and restraining her on the bed before asking if he is truly so horrible. Why did she leave him? Until she finally, confused, apologizes. Hearing his own name snaps the devil out of it, and the devil's body dissolves away until there's only John as a human. Overcome by her fever and the stress of this second attack by the devil, Annette passes out. She wakes up shortly afterwards, finding herself in a bathtub that John has prepared in her room, and she confirms that John has returned to himself completely and asks him to get in with her. So he wraps her in a towel and climbs into the tub, and she reflects on the fact that as a combination of her station and her isolation in the tower, she has basically never had a conversation with anyone other than the Duchess or Griselda since she was 6 years old. She's only had really short interactions with other people. And so John being nice to her in this moment makes her feel like her relief at having human connection just washes away all of her resentment of him. So why is she doing this? I can't tell you, but she kisses him again and confesses that she likes him before asking him to protect her before she passes out again. So she wakes up in bed and finds John sleeping on the floor. She asks him if he is all right since he's sitting out in the cold, just wrapped up in a sheet. And he tells her that he thought it was a nightmare. She said that she's glad it worked out this time, which upsets John enough to go pout in a corner since it's clear he did remember the first assault, but he had written it off as if it was not real. Annette reflects on the things that the devil who looks like John said and asks John if he actually does hate her. He says that it isn't her fault, but she wouldn't understand why he feels that way. Essentially, they cuddle through the night, and the next morning, Annette is awoken by Griselda, who is concerned that there's an unemptied bathtub and her dress is burnt in the fireplace. Since Annette literally doesn't know how to do anything by herself, Griselda is worried that Annette hurt herself, at which point she notices that Annette has a raging fever. Griselda leaves to go fetch Annette breakfast and medicine, and John takes this opportunity to sneak out from the clothes chest he was hiding in. And Annette reflects on how that was the best night of her life, basically. Meanwhile, Winfried has gone to the Duke and asked permission to perform an exorcism on John. Because of all the rumors about Annette since her ill-fated first marriage, Winfried argues that any additional strange rumors about John would negatively affect the war. Annette is worried that this exorcism might hurt John or even negate her wish to the Kretschmann. But luckily, John makes it through the night, much to Wilfried's chagrin. The priests who perform the exorcism leave to return to the monastery, and they actually have a really positive impression of John after that night, though one of them expresses that he felt something strange during the exorcism. Suddenly, their horses go crazy, and the men disappear one by one until the final priest looks up and sees a familiar person. Annette, at this point, is sick for several days. When she awakes, she finds an out-of-season flower on her windowsill, and Griselda reveals that they were brought by John to use as medicine. Annette is pleased to learn that John has not had a seizure since the exorcism, thinking that he has been freed from the devil. But Griselda reveals that the priests have disappeared without a trace. They never made it back to the monastery. Annette knows this is because the devil really isn't gone. That night, the devil who looks like John appears again, and he says that he has been holding back from visiting her to protect her like she asked. And Annette has this kind of touching monologue about how John represents everything she ever wanted, everything good. And she has decided that the Kretschmann has been purposefully pushing them towards each other in order to fulfill her wish, despite obviously their relationship being against God, being a sin. So to kind of give the Kretschmann what he wants to save John, she initiates the consummation of their relationship. I will say it is a little confusing in this regard because she states that they crossed over that last forbidden line, which implies that the first assault did not cross that line. And to be fair, the panels are pretty ambiguous. There's nothing like super explicitly portrayed. But until this point, I was operating off of the assumption that the devil did cross that line already. So this could be interpreted as her crossing that line with John as a human, or it could be interpreted as them crossing the line for the first time. Up for debate. But the next morning, Annette goes down to the Crutchman and asks him to cancel her wish. She did what she thought he wanted, but she's willing to get married now. She just wants John to be set free. During this time, Winfried has gone into John's room and discovered him missing, which immediately makes him suspicious of Annette, because John is secretly still sleeping in her bedroom. He scolds Griselda for not keeping a better eye on Annette, which Griselda kind of takes offense to because she's almost with Annette 24 hours a day. She's also offended by the implications that Winfried is making. Annette falls sick yet again, and John continues to bring her flowers every day to her immense joy. But Griselda, thanks to Winfried, has alarm bells ringing, and she is becoming more and more suspicious of their relationship. A few days later, Annette is, I believe, walking to church with Griselda, and she runs into Henrik Indridsson. This is the son of Annette's betrothed, so the elderly man she is supposed to marry, making Henrik her stepson. He starts off on kind of shaky ground because he laughs at when he overhears Annette, who, again, is super naive, asking which tree grew the meat pie that they had for dinner. He takes the opportunity to show her around the castle because she's literally only gone from her tower to church and back, unless her dad calls her somewhere. And he shows her the kitchen and he's like teaching her about how things are made. And this kind of wins her over to him. When he mentions that renown and power are also made by people, Annette notes bitterly that she had nothing to do with building up the Valdemar name as a woman. At this point, since Annette has recovered, the Duke tells Henrik that it is now time for her to follow him back to Indridsson. A banquet is thrown in her honor before they depart. But unfortunately, Annette has started her period, which, makes her absolutely miserable. But when she learns that John is returning for the banquet, she is inspired to attend and immediately tells Griselda to dress her up as beautifully as possible. John returns late and brings his men in full armor into the banquet hall, which annoys the Duke because this is considered an aggressive act towards their guests. And though he puts on a good face, he's secretly chewing John up when he comes close. Henrik, who kind of looks down on John because John is controlled so strictly by the Duke, he finds it kind of amusing, like, oh, this silly dog is trying to establish itself, basically. And seeing that John has returned, Annette makes her entrance, but she is almost immediately stopped by this brash knight who, kisses her hand to cheers from the crowd. And he won't let go of her. She has flashbacks to her traumatic wedding night where she was forced to consummate her first marriage in front of the court when she was only 12 years old. And, she's desperately trying to free herself from the knight's grasp to no avail when John steps up and just knocks the man unconscious. Annette is petrified, thinking that John killed him in front of all these people. But the knight quickly recovers. John chews him out a little, and everyone in the banquet is shocked that this just happened. But Henrik, ever suave and charismatic, he smooths things over, which gives John and Annette the opportunity to sneak out. Out in the hallway, away from the banquet, John comforts Annette. She's crying over everything that has happened. Her period's really painful. She knows her fate is just to have children and suffer at the hands of men. And her realization that this knight hurt her despite saying how much he respected her and how much worse will her husband be, who is rumored to have killed his previous 3 wives. So she asks John to run away with her. He tries to talk her out of it because obviously life as a civilian is a lot different than that of a noble, as well as the fact that he turns into this vicious devil that kills people. And Annette takes this the wrong way and thinks that he's only saying that because he's tired of her and afraid to lose his own status, which actually means something compared to hers. But he reassures her that that isn't the case and that he will begin making preparations for them to run away together. Griselda, who has been waiting in Annette's room for her to return, is spiraling. So she's just going over in her head all of these things. Winfried's warning to look over Annette, seeing John hold her, and now she's hallucinating their dead mother, especially the night that the twins were born and the Duchess killed the midwife because one of the babies was born a devil. The next day, Winfried confronts Griselda, demanding to know if she's figured it out yet. Griselda's appalled by his accusation, but Winfried, in kind of a jealous rage, because he caught her the previous night smoking a cigarette with Henrik, scolds her pretty harshly about not watching Annette, and that she should tell him immediately if Annette is acting strangely. When John and the Duke go out to collect taxes, Annette receives letters from John that are love poems disguised as an epic poem. So he's like retelling a famous love story, but she knows that it's meant for her. At this point, Annette is functionally illiterate. So, she usually has these letters read by a scribe. And Griselda, who follows her and listens in, catches on to what they mean. And she begs Annette to reconsider, saying anyone but him. Annette denies these allegations, and Griselda, in desperation, runs to Winfried to tell him about what she has learned. In turn, the next time Annette is in church, Winfried confronts her. He pointedly tells her that the new priest, who has a cleft palate and a deformed face, is actually the product of incest. Annette tries to play dumb, so Winfried comes straight out and tells her that he knows what's going on and that she should stop before it's too late. She asks why he even cares, and he laughs, saying that he doesn't care about her at all. He's actually worried for John. Annette blurts out that John loves her and she loves him too, but Winfried tells her that men are fickle, turning cold in the blink of an eye. There's no way she knows John loves her back for real, and that while he is the type to take responsibility, he's probably just so stressed from being the heir and a war hero that he's engaging with her just for the thrill of it. And this is a callback to Winfried's own reasoning for becoming a priest, and probably why he started this relationship with Griselda, who we know was his wet nurse. He continues to berate Annette about ruining John's life just because hers was already ruined, and then threatens to tell the Duke if she doesn't end the relationship. Annette recalls a pet panther that the Duke had that accidentally hurt John one day, and the Duke personally killed the animal and now has its hide hung up in the Great Hall. She knows that if the Duke knew, if she did try to run away with John, she would be just like that panther. John returns that night, and Annette, who has drugged herself with a sleeping draught to stop crying, thinks his return is a dream. He tries to get her up from bed and tells her that we're running away today. Remembering Winfried's words from the church, she resists, telling John that it should be another day. He asks her if something's wrong, so she begins to tell him about Winfried, but panics, knowing that that would just cause more issues. And instead, she tells him that she's still on her period and that he will get blood on his clothes if he has to carry her out of the window. Being naive to women and timelines, he believes her, but reasserts her that he doesn't care. They can just change their clothes. Nothing grosses him out. He'll do it. And Annette starts panicking more as he continues to pack her things. But as he does so, he uncovers the dagger that she took back from Winfried. He immediately, on seeing that dagger, doubts her feelings. And it is revealed through a flashback that this dagger is the same one that she stabbed him with years ago. So John is pissed. He seems to turn into a different person and accuses Annette of having lied this entire time, that she seduced him as a way to get back at him, that she still hated him as much as she had when she stabbed him. And he goes so far as to physically check whether or not she is still on her period. He says that he knew she never really loved him, but he was happy that she even deigned to touch him in the first place, that he would do anything she asked of him. She could stab him to death and he would be happy. And so he's sobbing, crying, clinging to her, and he's like stripping off both of their clothes. And Annette, trying not to be swept away by this, pushes him away and tells him that she was the one who summoned the devil. She did it to save herself from this horrible marriage. And even though touching John's hands fills her with disgust, she slept with John to take responsibility for his possession because he was nice to her. John is hyperventilating and sobbing as she tells him this. And 23-year-old Annette, chimes in with her letter saying, "Kretschmann, I will never forgive you for having made me kill John with words." Now John is in denial, saying that he knows this is the real lie, but Annette just twists the knife by repeating back all the hateful things that Winfried had told her earlier. John admits that his whole life he's had this feeling of wanting Annette to disappear because even a worm like him wanted to live, knowing she would eventually kill him. But she reached out to him, she said she loved him, and he believed it. Annette realizes in this moment that he has never actually once said the words "I love you" to her, despite the fact she has said them to him multiple times. But this man, despite never having said he loves her, is on his knees begging her to forgive him. For the final blow to get him to leave, she tells him that she'll sleep with him one more time, but she never wants to see him again. Distraught, he gets up and just jumps out the window. I know. Shortly thereafter, the wedding by proxy is held, and she departs for Indridson, having never spoken to John again after that night. And this is where she makes her first mistake, befriending Henrik. Meanwhile, John is hiding back up in her tower, sniffing her laundry that she left behind. So he's down bad. John reflects on how close he and Annette were as children, and he admits that he's always idolized her. And he's always been in love with her to some extent, though he also inherently knew that those feelings were sinful. After Annette's departure to Indridson, John goes back to war and is uncontrollable, killing literally anyone in his path. But because of his victories and then the funds they secured from Annette's marriage, they're able to capture an enemy prince and return home. At a banquet for their return, one of their vassals implies that they are poorly paid by John for their loyalty in the war. And the Duke makes a snide comment about how he had hoped John would know better by now, as obviously he doesn't have any more daughters to marry off as a reward. John does not take this. He storms out of the banquet and returns with the captive prince's head. So he leaves, he chops off this guy's head, who they're holding for ransom, and he throws it at their vassal before chewing out the Duke for selling Annette for money. Winfried is laughing it up with Griselda after the banquet because he thinks that there's no way the Duke understands what John was really angry about, and that only he and Griselda know everything. He sort of proposes to Griselda, mostly as a way to keep other men away from her, but Griselda refuses him and says that she knows something that he doesn't. 20 years ago, when the Duchess arrived at Gustav to marry the Duke, this is when Griselda first became her maid. Shortly after the wedding, all the Ducommon men had died, so the coffins arrive as the Duchess's inheritance. And 9 months later, the twins were born. Everyone was overjoyed, especially with the birth of a son. But Griselda knew something. Annette was a normal infant, but John was inhuman. He was born a devil. And he only moved to keep his eyes on Annette, slowly learning how to be a baby by copying everything Annette did. When the twins were born, with one clearly a devil, the Duchess took Griselda down to the coffins after killing the midwife, and she tells her about all the ways her family members have died as their wishes were perverted against them and ultimately destroyed them. She herself wished only for a son, but she was given a son who is a devil. So she opens another coffin and the Crutchman appears. He is like a ghost moving through the motions of his old life, but the Duchess manages to get his attention and asks her who killed her brother Dietrich. He tells her it was her husband's right-hand man, and the Duchess immediately knows that this was intentional, specifically to get the coffins into the Duke's hands. And she debates on what she should wish for to save her life. She eventually settles on asking for a beautiful son who looks and acts like a human. They return to the nursery and find that the devil has been transformed into a normal human baby boy. At this point, Griselda's husband begins having nightmares about her killing an infant and being burnt at the stake. The Duchess is also experiencing nightmares and is having seizures as well, and her maid from childhood, Jacqueline, who came from Ducommon to Gustav, states that the curse must be following them. When a rumor spreads that Jacqueline is pregnant, Griselda realizes that she's pregnant as well. Coincidentally, so is the Duchess. So all three of them are pregnant around the same time. And it is implied that the Duchess is pregnant because she has made another wish. One day, the storehouse erupts into flames. Griselda is pulled from the nursery by guards and taken before the Duke, where she finds her husband is also under arrest for burning down the storehouse to try and kill a demon he saw. To Griselda's horror, the Duchess arrives and demands that the husband be burned at stake, and it is revealed that he is an illegitimate child of the Ducommon. Griselda pleads for leniency and points out that the Duchess summoned the demon herself, but to no avail. The Duchess denies this, and Griselda's husband dies. She miscarries their child, and she only narrowly escapes being cast from the castle because the Duchess finally takes pity on her. After all, she knows her secret and allows Griselda to stay on as a nursemaid. When the Duchess gives birth, Griselda is forced to help her. This time, the baby is a real human boy. In her despair, she's lost everything, and then she's forced to watch the woman who stole it have what she wants. Griselda goes out into the gardens and finds, to her horror, that Jacqueline has also given birth and has buried the child to escape the cruel fate in their society of being an unwed mother. So Griselda unearths the baby boy, who is luckily still alive, and makes a decision. Just like Jacqueline said months ago, it is the Duchess's turn to suffer under the curse. So she goes up to the tower and she switches the two baby boys. As her husband had seen in his nightmares, Griselda kills the infant. And so she's telling Winfried that she loves him, the switched baby, as her own son, to Winfried's absolute horror, and tells him that she has begun seeing the Duchess's ghost, as she too is now trapped by the curse. So Winfried's world is shaken. The vindication he felt earlier, knowing his noble brother was just as filthy as him, disappears. And kind of overcome by everything and like wanting to maybe fix things, maybe also mess things up more, he decides to write a letter to John as if it were from Annette. So at this point, we cut back to Annette. She arrived safely in Indridson after a month of travel, where she met her feeble elderly husband. It is really hard for her to fit in, as despite having a southerner mother, she never learned their dialect or customs. However, she is ultimately happy. Unlike at home, she has the freedom to walk around the castle wherever she wants, and she goes to the library where she begins learning to read and to write. She starts thinking on how isolated and lonely she was back at Gustav, and wonders if nobody cared or if they cared and had been unable to do something. While initially, Henrik is still kind and helpful towards her, telling her that she can do anything she wants here, he quickly reveals that he plans to kill his father. But Annette at this point takes it as a joke and just kind of ignores him. At the next banquet, Annette has taken Henrik's words about freedom to heart, and when she is tired of, men kissing her hand and holding on to her like in all of her flashbacks, she flees. That night, her husband visits her for the first time and he beats her. Annette puts up with the beatings for months until one day, a tournament is held. Henrik wins and, to Annette's dismay, pledges his sword to her, essentially broadcasting that he sees her not as his stepmother, but as a woman. It is established that Henrik is maybe a decade older than her. Henrik holds her beatings over her, trying to get her to join him against his father, but Annette refuses. As punishment, knowing his father will beat her even harder for this, like he has done with all his past wives, Henrik kisses her in front of everyone at a banquet. The beatings intensify, and suffering from them, Annette enters this fugue state, essentially. She's like constantly being drugged with medication, and she hallucinates the devil that looks like John, repeating her cruel words from their last meeting to her, while shifting to and from the form of her abusive husband. And a snake that she sees as Henrik tries to convince her to join hands with him, or even return to Gustav to save herself. It starts quoting John's poetry to her, tempting her with offers of land and freedom, but she knows it's only a trick. There's no way Henrik would ever actually release her after getting power from her. In the brief moments when Annette is conscious, she obsessively writes letters to John, but she always burns them, or so she thinks. One day, John actually appears, convinced she's hallucinating him as the nightmare version of himself. She freaks out, but John pulls her into his arms and she realizes, oh, this is the real John. This is the real deal. She suddenly remembers their final meeting and pushes him away, but he tells her that he left as soon as he got her letter, taking 3 days to get there. And he knows how much pain she must have been in to send a letter to him. She panics, wondering if she sent the letter while drugged or sleepwalking, and that's why the beatings have intensified. But John reveals that he had been waiting hours to come in, and he watched Henrik sit by her side as the nurses tended to her. Annette connects the dots and realizes this is why the beatings have intensified. She's upset by, Henrik's continued betrayal of her, as well as John's attitude. She just starts yelling at him for showing up as if he knows what she needs, when a crossbow bolt shoots him through the neck. She turns around and her husband has come into the room. The old man begins beating her and beating John's presumably dead body. And Annette flashes back to the memory of her first wedding night from the smell of just the amount of blood in the room. And she remembers that it was John. John was the one who appeared and tore out the heart of her first husband. Unable to admit the truth of John's betrayal, she was ostracized by the court for being a bad omen. She was sequestered again for years in the tower, and she hated John for it until, overcome by this hatred, she blocked the memories to spare herself. So she's clinging to John's dead body, begging for him to come back to her when the old man attempts to beat her again. So she grabs a fire poker and just starts wailing on this old man. The guards outside begin breaking their way into the room and manage to knock the fire poker out of Annette's hands with a spear. In desperation, she grabs John's sword, struggling to pick it up. When John wakes up, takes the sword from her and tells her not to look. He rips the old man apart the same way he ripped apart her first husband as the guards break in. Annette realizes that he doesn't have his sword and presumably wouldn't be able to fight against the guards, so she begs him to run away and save himself. John scoops her up and leaps out the window. They crash to the ground, and Annette catches sight of Henrik staring out one of the windows before she helps John up and they limp away together from the castle. As they flee, John repeatedly dies and then resurrects because the bolt's still going through his neck. So Annette, is having to drag him as he dies and comes back to life, and she can't get the bolt out. She feels so guilty for making John like this, but he resurrects again and he just rips the bolt out himself. And he reassures her, she needn't feel any guilt because he's always been like this. He knows she will always hate him, but he was a monster from birth and she had nothing to do with it. I don't think Annette believes him because she disagrees. And she's like, I pushed you to go to these lengths. She sees that John has a rope literally made from her hair that he has secretly been collecting. That makes her realize that all she's really ever wanted is for John to be safe and to come back for her. It's not really explicitly stated in the comic, but I think John in this scene is partially reacting to memories because John hurts her. He pulls her hair and bites her neck and basically just dirty talks Annette into asking for forgiveness for everything she's ever done to him, calling her filthy, abandoning him, etc. You'll see this behavior mirrored in season 2. So Annette awakes the next morning and John is still asleep, so she sneaks away to a nearby river to tend to some of the wounds that were inflicted by the old man. Henrik magically appears and warns her that soldiers are searching the woods and insinuates that if she calls out, they will be able to kill John immediately. He helps her tend to her wounds and tells her that the last thing he ever expected was that her secret lover was actually her brother. And he's convinced that she was forced into this relationship and agreed to the marriage with his father to escape John. When Henrik asks her if it would arouse her to listen to him say the same dirty talk to John, Annette is incensed, and she says that the soldiers in the wood are no match for John, who would surely be the first to arrive if she called out. Henrik tries to bargain with her. No matter where they go, it is obvious that John and Annette are siblings. They're identical twins, essentially. So even if she thought that eloping with John would bring her happiness, there's no place on earth that would accept them. So Henrik proposes to her, promising to give her whatever she wishes for, but Annette refuses. Henrik admits that what he did to her was absolutely awful, but that ultimately, John isn't different. John is no different from him. John is the reason she was locked up. John took advantage of her innocence to seduce her, etc. And Annette realizes that, looking in from the outside, Henrik's assessment of their situation on the surface level is basically correct, but even if she can't confidently say that John is different than Henrik, using her for his own machinations, at least she knows that there is more to the story than just what Henrik sees. This is when she has her first hallucination, and she sees Annette the child across the river and reflects on whether or not she is walking into another prison of her own making, just like Annette the child was in the prison of the tower. But she leaves Henrik and she returns back to John. Sick yet again, Annette awakens later in an inn where a young girl named Aliona, who works there, lets her know that John has gone off to try and secure a carriage. Annette drifts in and out of sleep until night falls when John returns as the devil. Annette is terrified because, unlike in the past, because this devil is to her eyes half a devil, mutated body, but completely the mind of John. So previously, when she saw the devil as a full devil, it wasn't as scary because she could think of him more as a pet animal because he didn't speak coherently. John, as the devil, is obviously upset, so she tries comforting him through her fear as she's shaking, but he becomes increasingly agitated as he sort of meanderingly recounts his thought process over the last few days. From his words, Annette realizes that John returned to Indridson and she's assuming killed everyone there. He almost crushes her in his anger as he's recounting this, but she calls his name and he returns to his senses. 23-year-old Annette is reminiscing on this moment, and she decides that this was the moment when John began to lose himself. And it is also the first time that she dreamed she is the real devil and that she killed John. The next day, Annette is recovered. The girl from the inn, Aliona, has warmed up to Annette and starts mimicking John, who is outside arguing over a carriage he's ordered. And Annette realizes that she's never really, at least past their childhood, spent any genuine time with John. We see John ominously coming up the stairs, and Annette is overjoyed seeing him come into the room because she didn't actually imagine everything that happened. Meanwhile, Aliona is standing there looking suspicious because John introduced them as siblings. And so she's like seeing them sob in each other's arms and is just kind of like put off by this. Annette begs John to hold her again, and he tells Aliona to leave. And 23-year-old Annette reflects on like, there's zero chance Aliona didn't know what was going on, but she never went to report them. At this, John is super pissed. He tells Annette that she should hate him because after seeing him fully conscious as John the devil, she should realize now that he was the one who did all of those terrible things to her, and that he would prefer that she hate him rather than have her feelings change, because at least she would stay with him as she had been. She wouldn't change enough to leave him. And Annette's confused by this, but when John says that Annette is revolted by him, she realizes that he had been aware of how frightened she was the night before. And so while John continues going on about how scary and horrible he is, Annette sees that there are still devil scales going up the back of John's neck. She finishes connecting the dots and tells John that he clearly didn't remember everything, or he would have remembered how she comforted him even though she was afraid of the unknown, this half-demon John, because ultimately John has saved her from hell and she can't hate him because of that. As Annette stays in the inn over the coming weeks, she becomes friends with Aliona, and poor, sweet Aliona tentatively asks if, unlike what John said when they arrived, are they actually cousins? Because they're clearly different than her and her brother. And Annette agrees with this since admitting otherwise is a crime, and Aliona's relieved. Aliona is trying to suggest that Annette go on a walk to help recover her health when John enters the room and he forbids it. So Aliona, trying to get away from him, excuses herself and returns to work, where she overhears some men talking about how Indridson Castle's walls have been turned black and that crows are picking at the corpses hung down all the walls. One of the men mentions that it was the work of that blonde-haired devil. And Aliona is like, oh shit, because she immediately knows it's John. Rather, she thinks John is controlling the devil, but potato, tomato. So at this point, we begin seeing some real changes in John's personality. He becomes increasingly jealous of Annette spending time with Aliona and repeatedly expresses how afraid he is that Annette will be stolen away or choose to leave him. She senses something's wrong with him, feeling real fear over him for sort of the first time when he is John the human. But he gives her, I think, a mandolin, and she's torn because while he's becoming scarier, he's also becoming more pitiful when he does things like this. John announces that he will be gone for a week as he is returning to Gustav, and Annette finally connects the dots, realizing that it was a month-long journey for her, and it's only 3 days for him, so he must be traveling as the devil. Annette tries asking him if he's returning because of the coffins and if that's how their father is controlling John, but he refuses to really answer. And she just tries to have him promise like that he will tell her everything when he returns. This is when Annette has her first dream of Annette the Knight, who tells her that John was right Our reflexes tell all. So like Annette's earlier reflex to be afraid of the half devil. And Annette the Night asserts that Annette's reflex is to kill John because she hates him so much. Through her life, Annette has hated so many people, pretty much everyone in her life. You know, her mother for locking her up, her father for repeatedly selling her brother Winfried for putting his station above her safety, and her nanny for spying on her. But Annette the Night argues that because she keeps dreaming of killing John, clearly Annette hates John the most. This room where John keeps her with trinkets and niceties is just their third prison cell. Annette tries to argue against this, that she isn't John's prisoner, as he told her earlier, and that she could leave if she wants. But Annette points out how John has always done things like this. He would give her trinkets at home too, but he did nothing to free her from the tower. Annette argues that John has never hurt her, like the old man Indridson, who beat her, or her father, who also beat her. But Annette the Night tells her that violence isn't only physical. John has committed violence by continually sabotaging the happiest moments of Annette's life. They argue back and forth for a while when it finally clicks for Annette that she imagines killing John all the time, not from some weird sense of guilt, but because she likes to see him be pitiful under her foot. Because, like, you know, that just represents like she's now in control. And Annette's vision ends with Annette the Night and Annette the Child beckoning her to leave the room to free herself from John. Annette is shaken by this revelation she had in the dream and spends the night debating over whether or not she actually loves John. Aliona comes in to help her get ready in the morning and admits, now that John's gone, that she's known all along, from the moment Annette awoke that first morning, that John and Annette were the twins from Gustav, and Annette was the caged princess. But Aliona never reported them because she could tell that Annette was just enduring all of John's treatment and lust for her. Aliona says that the beautiful furniture and the trinkets, all of them in the world, aren't enough to sell your freedom, and that at least while John is gone, Aliona will help Annette leave the room. Annette remembers how upset John was at the banquet in Gustav when she was dressed up so beautifully, and he had stated that he wanted to tear the eyes out of everyone there so that he would be the only one to look at her. It was so painful. And Annette, with her newfound realization that she wants control, wonders how much pain it would cause John now for her to leave the inn and have other men see her, like he said was so painful for him. So Annette spends the next week outside, and suddenly Henrik reappears. Without his father and his father's power, Henrik has gone into hiding to preserve his own life because he is now the target of raiders and mercenaries who are trying to steal his claim to the Indridson name and lands. Seeing her, Henrik realizes, since they're pretty close, that it was John. John was the one who killed everyone in the castle. And he starts dragging Annette up to his room in the inn. On the way, Annette sees a prostitute being assaulted by a group of men, and she's really full of herself in this moment. She pities the prostitute because Annette knows that she at least has the spirit of initiative, unlike the other woman. This spirit of initiative that she's talking about is essentially John's devotion to her allows her to make decisions that protect her because she is his weakness. Henrik, once they're in his room, demands to know where John is gone, and Annette asks if it's because Henrik wants revenge. And Henrik admits that, actually, no, he's thrilled that John killed his father and everyone else in that castle because his life was terrible underneath them, and he's finally free from all the threats on his life from his own people. And Annette, seeing how happy and free Henrik is, she's just overwhelmed with envy. She sees his eye as like a representation of the freedom he has, so she kisses his eye. And Henrik immediately takes this as like, oh, an invitation. But internally, Annette says that this kiss is a curse because she knows that it's the end of the week and John is probably already outside. So Henrik asks Annette what her plan is. Did she abandon John? Did he abandon her? There's no way he did that after everything that happened at the castle. Why is she even waiting for John, this guy who couldn't control himself and ruined her life so many times? And it basically says that no matter what she wanted to do to John, he would let her. She could stab him. She could rip his throat out. He's weak only to her. he would die to let her do anything she wanted. And Henrik kind of laughs, since it makes sense that only a man who can't die would love a woman for whom you must put your life on the line. And Henrik sort of plays along, asking Annette, well, how would you actually kill him? And remembering her first dream where she beheaded John, Annette begins having a panic attack and declares that if anyone would dare to do such a thing, she'd kill them with her bare hands. And despite all her dreams about killing John, ultimately, her body completely rejects the idea of his death. And she knows that for all her bragging that she's John's weakness, he is her weakness as well. She laments that she will never have Henrik's eyes, his freedom, no matter how much she longs for them. And Henrik tells her, like, he can be her answer. They can run away together. They start making out, and Annette the Knight appears to tell Annette that John can sense everything about her. So any feeling she has, he knows about it. So if they can't hurt him physically, since he is essentially immortal and much stronger than her, they can at least hurt his spirit. So meanwhile, John is downstairs annihilating everyone at the inn. And Henrik gets up, realizing something's amiss. It's too quiet. But Annette, knowing that if Henrik leaves, John won't catch them together, she stops Henrik from leaving by trying to seduce him. And John storms into the room and just begins laying it on Henrik, beating him up, when Annette interrupts him, asking John, if you're planning on killing him, kill me too. And John is flabbergasted, and he asks, like, do you love him? And he grabs Henrik and just throws him out in the hall and locks him out of the room. And Annette revels in this, knowing that John is doing this out of fear that she will leave him. He begins, he can't control himself, and he begins transforming into the devil, just sobbing on the ground, telling her that, like, he's always known, just like he said before, that she just wants to make a fool of him. And he wants to know, like, why won't you just love me? And 23-year-old Annette, again, is chiming in the letter and says that she thought John at this point was just saying anything that came to mind, because at this time, she did not know that Idris, the Kretschmann's son, and his memories were the devil inside of John. And she realizes now that Idris's memories had been destroying John his whole life, and were just like escalating from this point onwards. So John, on the ground, sobbing, just continues saying that, like, he's allowed Giovinetta to abuse him despite how ardently he served as her knight. And Annette, really confused by some of the things he's saying. And so she picks up his sword and she asks him if he finds her disgusting, having played with him this way. And she says that she's never had any power her entire life, just their Valdemar name, and then her husband's name, and now John's shameful love. So overcome with how shameful and pathetic that kind of power is, even though it's her spear of initiative, she attempts to cut her own throat. But John leaps into her arms and he blocks the sword. It cuts into his wing, and Annette declares in his arms that, like, she's been the devil the whole time. The next chapter is essentially just Annette torturing John. She demands that he live in atonement for his sins, because his choices through their life are responsible for who she's become. He started all of this. She says, upon hearing my command, my half-human, half-devil looked as if he were at the brink of death. This is the expression I've been waiting for. My heart cried out for me to kill John. It cried out for me to protect myself. So John doesn't try to defend himself. He only asks if Annette really loved Henrik. And Annette tells him that he's an idiot. Only reason she's clinging so hard to John, inflicting all of this pain on him, is because ultimately she loves him, this person who chewed her life into nothing. And so John just keeps apologizing, but Annette shreds him to pieces, describing how, like, despite his revered reputation and, like, external behavior, inside, he was obsessed with all these sinful thoughts about her. And he passed off the bad parts of their relationship as nightmares instead of taking full responsibility. And while doing so, he essentially forced her to love him by acting so pathetic and devoted. She's upset because he can be his own person during the day, even though at night he claims to be hers. Still begging for forgiveness, John he begs Annette to touch him, but she tells him that there's no way she can forgive him for that when he's only been brought down this low once, and she's been brought down this low her whole life. And so she attempts to storm out. While she does that, in her head, she's like dealing with the fact that she both despises and desires John, but she sees his lust for her as a way for him to ignore his emotions. He doesn't have to confront anything intellectually, essentially, if he can just act physically on desires. And she wants his heart to feel that same burning passion for her as his body does. So she attempts to leave, but John leaps up and grabs her, and he makes a terrible confession. He says, "I love you, Annette. It's always been you." So Annette is thrilled, because in all these moments where you would say, "I love you," and when they've confirmed their feelings for each other, John has never actually said those words. He's always describing his love using other feelings, like, "It hurts me when men look at you," or "Don't leave me. I would do anything for you," etc. You know, essentially, he's just dodging the question of whether he loves her by redirecting the conversation to other issues. And so, like, hearing him say this is just like orgasmic for her. And then we cut to 23-year-old Annette, who is telling the Kretschmann in the letter that memory of John finally admitting his love still brings her to tears, before revealing that 2 years later, back in her tower, John is now the Duke of Gustav, and the devil is still madly in love with her, despite everything. And so the next chapter, the final chapter of season 1, cuts to a memory of John and Annette at 4 years old. Winfried is a baby who's getting his first teeth, and Griselda notes that it won't be too long before Annette begins to lose her baby teeth. John hesitantly asks if his teeth will fall out too, and after a pause, Griselda tells him that he has always followed after his sister. And Annette makes a joke about how John has always just copied her. But as they fall asleep that night, John begins to dream of Idris. So the Kretschmann, Idris's father, confronts him about his research and berates him for having given it to that foul wench, when it was all for the sake of bringing Idris's mother back to life. Like, this research ruined the Kretschmann, and Idris just gave it away. Idris tries to get his father to leave the castle when the Kretschmann points victoriously at the throne, declaring a leopard never changes its spots. And Idris turns to see Giovinetta kissing her brother Xavier on the throne. So that night, Idris confronts Giovinetta, but she refuses to give a straight answer. Idris has done everything that she's asked for. He handed over the research. He lives as her knight during the day, because she promised that if he did this, she would be his at night. But he's come to regret ever having met Giovinetta and Xavier, because the twins have only ever been a detriment to him. We get some snippets of how they treated him. He was tied up naked in a cage as a child, and they're just looking down at him. And Giovinetta is like really distraught by this accusation, asking like, "Do you really see me as a detriment to you?" And Idris says like, "Yes, you are a detriment to me because I love you." And that is where season ends. So that was the first 60 chapters of Lady Devil. Pretty wild. Again, obviously some really heinous stuff happens, but I think the like psychological journey down into like how these people are going crazy is just so good. I am breaking this series up into 2 videos because it would be so long to cover all 23 chapters. So the next video will be seasons 2 and 3. Discussing the art. I really love the art in this comic. You can tell in the first few chapters that the artist was coming into the final designs. It does look different than the rest of the story, but not so different that it's like jarring, because they do flash back to those chapters occasionally. Personally, I don't like reading comics that are especially visually graphic, so I appreciate how this artist manages to get things across without it being like obscene. The emotions in the characters are so strong, like you can feel them. Sometimes in comics, I feel like the artist chooses not to illustrate scenes. They'll just go from character to character and then close-ups of characters together. But the artist for this comic did a really good job of putting in full, like, blown out images down of the world to give you like a better feeling of all the things going on. That being said, some of the backgrounds are pretty ambiguous, but again, it's a comic, not a movie. Now, as for the story, I really hated Winfried's storyline. I can't really tell what it was supposed to be showing us. Like, at least with Annette and John, you're seeing, they're battling over good and bad points of their abuser, versus Winfried's storyline was just like a vehicle for Griselda to tell the backstory. I don't think it develops well over the next 2 seasons either. It's pretty much like inconsequential ultimately. I would have preferred not having him sleep with his nursemaid. Season 1 ultimately is like a really good introduction into the rest of the series. So we're building up to the breaking point of John and Annette. And from here on out, we're going to be learning about Idris, Giovinetta, and Xavier, and how they are tied to the creation of the Devil of Ducommon. And I feel like the shifting appearance of the devil is definitely indicative of Annette's warped view of who John is and how he is changing through the story. Just because they're so different, I don't think it was accidental. It's not like the artist drew the same thing, just bad. They're completely different looking. And then they go back to what he looked like. So I think it's supposed to be a higher level interpretation. But so I have a lot of thoughts about this comic. Ultimately, I think it's just kind of representative of generational trauma and people not being able to separate their abuser from the person that they thought their abuser was. Hopefully you can appreciate what I'm trying to say about this comic. I've read it multiple times. I really like it. There are some ambiguous portions, which I did discuss as I summarized. That being said, I have not read the web novel. The comic finished in August of 2023. The web novel version or translation wasn't posted on Manta until 2024, and it has reached 7 volumes, each of around 60,000 words, but is currently on hiatus due to the creator's health issues. Who knows how consistent the story is between the two. I had explained this through the summary of the comic, but I ended up taking most of these clips out. So I'm just going to explain them all together here. This bit is kind of an analysis taking in my knowledge of season 2 and 3 combined with what we just saw in season 1. So if you don't want spoilers really for the next 2 seasons, probably skip the screen when it looks like this. There were a few things that I thought were really powerful in the story, particularly regarding the art. You can see that at multiple times, the eye color of the characters changes. So when John is not himself as the devil, so when it's the devil who looks like John and the eyes are gray, he is not conscious. He's not a person in the devil at that moment. The devil is just repeating things, kind of like a broken record. Versus when the devil actually has blue eyes, that is John, if not in control, at least present in the devil. So when Annette is talking about the half devil being more frightening than the full devil, that's kind of what she's referring to. As we get into season 2 and 3, there are also a lot of scenes that are framed in the same way between John and Annette and Giovinetta and alternatively Idris and Xavier. So season 1 is kind of just showing how both of them, they are starting off really closed off, burying their true feelings and desires, but slowly unraveling and revealing who they really are inside. Meanwhile, due to the Kretschmann's influence, both of them are also sort of regressing to who they were in their past life. There was a lot more of 23-year-old Annette also like contributing thoughts throughout season 1, but they're pretty abstract thoughts that you can't really tie them together until you learn more in season 2 and 3. So I didn't really include these thoughts in with the summary. There are people on Reddit who have read the novel and they point out that essentially it has reached the point of the end of season 1 plus all the information about Idris and Giovinetta, but everything past this with Annette and John is kind of extrapolated from where the story was going, essentially. Otherwise, people think they're pretty identical, minus specifically the scene with Henrik in the inn. So that scene doesn't happen at all in the book, apparently, as it is currently written, which honestly, I think I would prefer. Apparently, the scene initially had Annette and Henrik going all the way. And then the Korean manhwa readers were so upset that the creators pulled that chapter like 2 days later and rewrote it to be what it is currently. So just them like making out, essentially. I remember when I first read those chapters, I was so upset because I honestly don't think it really fits in with Annette's characterization in general, but I can see why they ultimately went that direction because it is honestly a really good way for her to establish her first steps into being Giovinetta. That's like very quintessential to Giovinetta's character, but obviously we're not learning that until the next 2 seasons. So someone posted a review on Reddit 2 years ago and they had like a notepad with all their thoughts as they read it. And some of these are so funny. Number 1, okay, girl, LMAO, you got an asshole for a dad. Huh, I wonder why this was wrecked. Oh. 2, oh, he Jacob Black? No, but like the Goated Harpy version? What? 3, LMAO girl, running away is the best choice. Take Griselda with you, Jesus. 4, you know, the whole blonde hair, sister brother incest, royal stuff, and Sir Barthion reminds me of a certain series with similar themes. 5, but since we're on the topic of incest, I do find myself appreciating the flavors of taboo rolled into this manga. Like, I thought that literal and pseudo incest was it, but somehow there's metaphorical incest as well, and that had me fumbling. 6, where on earth are the guards? Why are they always MIA? What are they getting paid for? How do they conveniently appear? 7, she's lost it, understandably. 8, Gio, girl, don't trust any man who asks you to stay with them. 9, okay, that's a creative appearance for the devil. Looks like a cross between a dog, harpy, horse, and goat. 10, this should have been higher up, but Kretschmann must be entertained by the shit show he's got front row tickets to. But also, does he want the smutty details? Is Kretschmann a pervert? 11, hold the F up. Gio, what did I tell you? Don't ever trust a man who asks you to stay with him. Jesus, what is going on here? Also, Knight, you is smart. I'll give that to her, at least in accordance with this manga. So she's talking about Annette the Knight. 12, I mean, Johnny Boy's not exactly the definition of healthy. I'm glad you're seeing his red flags for the communist parade it is. Self-awareness is important. 13, incest appears again. 14, okay, that boy's going to die. R.I.P. You will be missed. Honestly, it's kind of your fault too. Oh, he didn't. LMAO. I sure don't hope you're plot relevant again at some point. Your luck is amazing in this questionable story. 15, I like how from chapters 58, the warning stopped being specific. It's like they didn't know what to warn us for either. And then the rest of their comments are for the next 2 seasons. Well, season 2 and 3 will be coming in another video. If this one doesn't scare everyone off from the comic, let me know down in the comments below, I guess. Well, that's all for now. I will see you next time.